Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I have a mixed media canvas tutorial that I want to share with you. This is my first Yvonne Blair Art Girls project. Today I am going to feature 4 of her stamps: the Inner Child stamp, the Sketch Butterfly 2 stamp, Sketch Daisy stamp, and the Sketch Twig stamp. Check with your local retailers to get these stamps in. Also, you can find them at the iostamps.com website, and I will put links to everything down below and to a blog post over at the Art Girls creative blog. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a lot of techniques to share with you today on this one canvas. I'm prepping my canvas with a little bit of the Liquitex matte medium. This is the fluid medium, and I've added way too much here on this canvas board. This is just a 7x9 canvas board. So I'm just scraping off the excess onto a piece of wax paper, and then I'm going to add this Tim Holtz tissue wrap in the melange, and I'm scraping that across with one of the Ranger scraping tools, and then you can use a credit card too. It just happened to be what I reached for. Now I'm just going to add a really thin coating of gesso. This is just going to knock that pattern back to the background, and it's not going to compete with my design that's on my canvas this way. And I like to do this too because it gives a little bit of a tooth to this tissue paper and allows my other mediums to have something to grab a hold of. So now for my base layer, I'm going back over with a double scoop gelato from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. This is the snow cone color, and I'm just rubbing that liberally over the top of that gesso. Now the gesso was completely dry. I'm rubbing it in with my finger, and then I've gone back with the wet paintbrush, and now I'm just gonna mist it with a little bit of water and work it in with my fingers, and then that's just going to kind of help to blend in all of that gelato. Now I'm going to heat set that and let it dry really well. Now at this point, the gelato, if I were to hit it with water, it would still reactivate, but that's okay. I'm going to go back and add a coat of gel medium at the very end to just kind of seal everything down. This is one of Yvonne's stamps. This is the Sketch Twig, and I'm adding the Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. I think this is the Chromium Green Opaque number 174. This is a dark green, and I'm coloring directly onto the stamp. These are the Stampers Big Brush Artist Pens, and what that's going to do is these stamps are permanent once they're dry, but until they dry I do have some leeway with trying to blend them. So what you're going to see me do is color directly onto the stamp with the colors that I've selected. The green that you see here is the green gold number 268, which is kind of a mustard yellow color, and then you'll see me come back in and fill in with those colors, and then you'll see me take my finger and just blend them. As long as this pigment is on a prepped surface, which it is with the gelato and the gesso and everything below, I can come in and use my finger to blend. And then once this sets, this ink dries permanent, so I don't have to worry about it smearing or contaminating or picking up anything from below, or or becoming too muddy. So now what I've done is I've come back in with which color is that? The dark sepia number 175 to fill in the centers of my daisies. And some of my stamps, what I've done is I've only colored in half the daisies, so I get a little bit of a perspective on them. And I'm looking for a really nice wildflower background. So as you'll see, as I'm stamping, what I'm doing is I'm only partially stamping that stamp down, so I get some variations in perspective. So instead of you guys watching me paint this entire canvas in the same pattern or same fashion, I'm going to speed the video up and come back whenever everything's all colored in. So now that all my flowers are drawn, I'm just going to hit that with the heat gun and make sure everything is good and dry and set. So because I don't want my colors to blend too much. So then I'm going to come back with my cadmium yellow number 107, and I'm going to pull in some highlights on top of my flowers. Now I will say this, the color was just not quite strong enough, and while I can see The highlight, it is not as obvious on camera, but it's also a very subtle highlight. So I'm not getting the look I'm after here. To be perfectly honest with you, I could have probably skipped the step altogether, but I wanted to show it in the video because I really firmly believe that with some of these flowers and things, the more details you can add, it adds a lot of depth as far as shadowing and things like that. It makes your flowers look a little more realistic. So even though you may not realize how much you're adding as far as highlights and shadows go or depth, the slightest little itty bitty detail sometimes adds a very powerful punch. So now I've realized that I really wanted a little more detail in those flowers. So I'm coming back with a little of the Liquitex Iridescent Bright Gold acrylic ink, and this is going to give a little bit of a sparkle too to all of my little daisies. So I'm just going to lightly and very carelessly paint the insides of all of these daisies, and then I'm taking the back of the paintbrush and just kind of stippling in some dots inside of the centers of my daisies so that there's a little bit of a texture in there. I'm trying not to pick up too much pigment for the center of my daisies, just kind of tapping in some little dots just to give a few highlights and into that area as well, and it makes them look more dimensional. So very carelessly, like I said, this is supposed to be sloppy because it's a background, and when I'm done, it's really, I want it to look more blended and not so much full of detail. Now, if you are someone who really doesn't want a whole lot of dimension on a canvas, you just want to stick with something flat, I've left that center area open, and this would make an excellent background for a journal page as well. So keep this design in mind if you decide you wanted to duplicate it on a Bible journal page, as well as a a journal book as well. You could definitely follow all of these steps up until the point where I do the dimensional side of it, and follow these exact same steps for any of your journal pages. So now I've reached for a little bit of the Daler Rowney Magenta acrylic paint, and I've just added, it's a full-bodied paint, and I'm adding just a small dab there on my wax paper, and using the back of the paintbrush, I'm taking the stamp that was the sketch twigs, and I'm adding just a couple of stipples there onto those branches of this magenta, and what that's going to do is give me like some wildflowered looks, and then I had accidentally created this blob there in the upper left, so it's now going to become a rose, and I've decided that we need to embrace the imperfections and just run with them, I guess. Why not just throw a little bit of a posy there, right? So if you add one, you got to add three, right? So I've added them in a visual triangle there, one in the bottom, one in the upper right, and then there's the one in there on the left. So what I've done is just basically it's just a blob. I just smeared out a little semicircle pattern, and I'll come back with some white paint in just a few minutes and fill it in, and it'll make perfect sense then. So my advice here is just go with it. So here I've just scored out some white paint, and now I'm just in a semicircle, just drawing some little C's around in 3 different areas, and the rose just kind of somewhat takes shape. And it just very abstract. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think if the visual elements are there to make up the bulb look, your eye will focus in and make it look like a rose in a way. So here I've just added a little bit of alcohol actually to this little paint mixture there on my left, and I'm splattering that around. The alcohol dries a little bit faster. So while that painting in the background there dries, I've decided to pull out a resin frame from Prima, and I'm taking another one of my Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Stampers Big Brush Artist pens. This one is, I think this is the Cobalt Green, number 156. And I am coloring up this frame with this. This is kind of a tedious thing because there's a lot of detail in this resin pieces. I probably could have went with a different medium, but remember that these pens do dry perfectly permanent. So is the word I'm looking for. I will say this though, the resin does sort of resist the ink on this. I'm using alcohol to spread that. I don't really know why other than it was just sitting there. And I'm using a cosmetic sponge to kind of blend it in. This frame is going to end up having multiple layers of all kinds of things. I do know that water would have rolled right off of that, so maybe the alcohol helps to react with the Stamper Big Brush Artist pen a little better. Then I spritzed it with a little bit of Lindy Stamp Gang. Again, that is the Steampunk Sepia, and that gave it a really nice patinaed look. So while that dries, I'm going to work on the inside of my frame. And I've just gone in my scrap pile and pulled out a piece of black cardstock that fits the size of the frame. I've used my embossing buddy to prep my cardstock there, and then I've used my Versa ink to stamp my sentiment. This is warning my inner child is on the loose, and this is one of Yvonne's stamps. It's called Inner Child. And then I've heat embossed that with some white embossing powder. And to add that to the frame, I've used some of Ranger's Wonder Tape. And so now it's time to put that to the side for just a minute, and let's work on one of our background pieces. This is the Dusty Attic Circle Mesh in the small, and I'm ripping it apart so I could get some really nice texture here. And I'm using some of Faber-Castell Design Memory Crafts white gesso, and I'm adding it very sloppy because I do want some thickness here in some of these circles. I do not have any full body gesso. If you do, then I would suggest just doing that instead. So to make up for not having any, I went into my stash and found this Prima texture paste in white crackle, and I'm adding it with a popsicle stick. Just around the edges that I know will be peekabooing out, because I do want to see that thickness of paint. The idea here is this is going to look like a trellis in a garden, and I wanted it to look textured, tattered, torn, and as if it had been painted 1,000 times and the paint was just crackled and awful. There's no other way to describe that. But anyway, I'm going to put that to the side and let it dry, and now I'm going to work on my canvas. Confession, before I painted this trellis, it has shifted to another day, so the canvas has had time to really cure and dry overnight. So I pulled out one of my Jelly Roll white gel pens, and I am doodling inside of each one of the flowers. It's just basically scribbles. I'm very sloppily scribbling over the top of the flowers. I wanted to just give them more of a doodled, scribbly look, for lack of a better word. So once all the flowers have been doodled inside of, then I decided to use that trellis piece as a stamp and just kind of haphazardly stamp some of those patterns around, just to kind of knock that pattern that's there on the back of the canvas into the background. It's just going to give it a really interesting texture back there, and hopefully some of this white will kind of send that really busy pattern back to the background. So again, pulling and tugging at those edges and really roughing them up a little bit so they stand out. I'm still struggling with that frame. It's just blending in way too much. So I pulled out my flutter box from Indigo Blue, and I am taking the glue or flitter box, and I'm taking the glue and adding it to a cosmetic sponge and just rubbing that all around the frame. And now I'm going to take the Winter Dawn flakes, which is a combination of silver, copper, bronzy, gold. It's a whole bunch of different colors there, and I'm just kind of adding a small amount there to the frame. Now, I did not add glue all over this frame on purpose because I still want to see some of that blue shine through of those excess flakes down. And I love that this comes with a box, so I just trap it all there in the box and then put it aside, and then I can scoop it all back into that little bucket later. Then I'm taking the archival ink in coffee, and I'm just rubbing that around the edges of the frame, and then also rubbing it over some of that silver to kind of tone it down and make it look more like tarnished silver. I'm loving that. So I have these applique part, and I wanted them to be the leaves for my flower arrangements, so I've colored them up with a little bit of Lindy Stamp Gang and Idlewild Moss Green. So I'm building out my embellishment cluster here, and I found this pen nib from Tim Holtz, so I've added it there as an explanation point to my statement, because my inner child is always on the loose, and that is an explanation point. I just absolutely love the stamp. So I found one of these Tim Holtz charlatan dolls that I've had in my stash for a while, so I felt like what a perfect opportunity to use this little guy. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, if you've used these, but they don't really stick well with hot glue, but you'll see me use hot glue. The hot glue is just to kind of give it a temporary anchor until the glossy accents that I've also added there has a chance to dry. So as I pick this up and move it around, it just stays for a little bit until the glossy accents dries. Couple other elements I want to point out as I build out my flower arrangement here is I've gone into my stash. This is my embellishment clusters are the opportunity for me to use up some of the things that I call my one-hit wonders. I have a bucket on my desk of things I don't like to put away. So it's typically the things I use in embellishment clusters. Charms, pen nibs. They're usually things that are the one thing that's left over in a package. Buttons are typical things that I'd find there, metal pieces, that kind of thing. So I encourage you to go through your stash and see what you have that you could include in embellishment clusters. If you have flowers that don't necessarily match, this is a great opportunity to use those and just paint them a different color. So notice I'm using buttons as my flower centers. If they don't match, that's fine. Just paint them. Drop some alcohol ink on them. So for the little butterfly, what I decided to do was to use some of this quick dry polymer clay. It's called Polyform Model Air Dry Clay. And I've rolled out a very small thin ball, and then I've used my brayer there to bray it out. And I don't really care if I get goo all over it because I'm going to paint it anyway. I pressed my stamp into it. This is the butterfly, the Sketch Butterfly 2 stamp from Yvonne. And then I've pressed my stamp into it, and again I'm keeping it very thin because I want it to dry fast. And I've traced around it with a bone folder, peeled it out of its housing there, and then now I'm just taking an X-Acto knife and trimming out the excess. Now it's very fragile at this point because the clay is still kind of wet. But I'm going to set it to the side for about 30 minutes and let it dry. It's not completely dry yet, and that's fine because that's what I want, because I want to be able to mold it, but I don't want it so wet that it crumbles on me. So I'm going to take my Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft pens, and I'm going to go ahead and color him up whatever color you want. I want him to match a little bit, so I'm going to use the turquoise color that I have here. And this is that green-blue color that I used earlier. I think it's called Cobalt Green, number 156. And then I'm going to trace around his little body in the, that's not black, it's kind of a gray. It's a, did I write it down? Cold gray VI235. And then I'm going to trace around his wings. Now he's dimensional, so I want to make sure I get around his edges as well. Then to give him a little bit of depth, I'm also going to come back with this phthalo blue, number 110, and I'm going to push out before it has a chance to dry with my finger to just kind of help blend it a little bit. Now, he's still quite wet, but you see me hitting him with the heat gun there. That's to set the ink more than it is to dry the clay, because the clay is still very, very wet. But what I've done is I've rolled him around on my finger to just give him a little bit of a curl. And then I hit him with the Lindy Stamp Gang, the Blazing Sun. And that gave him a little bit of a shine. And now I'm using a little bit of hot glue to anchor him to my canvas, but I'm also adding some glossy accents behind him as well, because hot glue will not hold clay either. but it will temporarily bond while the glossy accents has a chance to dry. And he's going to rest there overnight, and then he's going to finish drying and completely harden in his spot, and he will be stuck there for life, I promise. Now, after he is completely hardened, and I did not show this on camera, I'm just going around right now and adding some glass glitter in some strategic places, but after he was completely dried and cured overnight, I did go back over the top of him with a little bit of gloss gel to just seal him up really well and give him a nice glossy finish. So after I've added some glitter all around, I love to do that in the negative spaces. I've added 2 colors of glitter here. One I did off camera, one I did on camera, but in the shadow areas at the base of the flowers, I added a green glass glitter, but then on the tops of all of the flowers I added a silver glass glitter, and that's just going to be your highlights and your shadows. I'm using the green as your shadow color and then the silver as your highlight color. And then I decided that the pink in the background was really drawing my eye more to the background, so I just pulled out some little teeny tiny baby roses and spritzed them with a little bit of raspberry lemonade Lindy Stamp Gang and added those into my floral spray just so that they match the pink and the florals. So here you can really see my butterfly. He's so gorgeous, isn't he? And you can really see all of that texture in the background from the doodled stamps, as well as how my chalkboard looks with my little Charleston doll there and his little glitter casing and the foiling on my frame. There's my finished canvas. Do not forget to go check out the blog post, which I will have linked down below. You can see much clearer photos over down there, and you'll also get some more information as well as details about the products that were used today and where you can purchase these stamps. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me during this process video. As always, if you've enjoyed this production, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and don't forget to share this with a friend.